I'm Helene Fronick. Welcome to Doc Talk, San Diego County Medical Society's webinars on enhancing communication in the healthcare setting. During our last Doc Talk, we talked about Sir William Osler's wise remark that it's much more important to know what sort of a patient has a disease than what sort of a disease a patient has. We talked about asking what about this concerns you the most in order to get at our patient's perspective, because that is going to be important in our treatment planning, isn't it? Now I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about the accuracy of the information we get from our patients. Now, each day we all misspeak. One day I was in yoga class, and our very experienced and competent yoga teacher asked us to get into child's pose. Now, this may not seem odd because child's pose is a pretty common pose, except for the fact that we were all on our backs, and we knew that at this point in the class, she really wanted us to get into happy baby pose. Now, you can see how she would mix this up. Both of those poses have the word child in them, but you can also see that nothing could be further from one pose than the other pose. I'm sure that you've all had the experience where you thought you said one thing and people said that you didn't. Maybe your spouse or your kids or your office staff said, no, you didn't say that, you said this. Now, whether we misspeak or they mishear, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because the important point is that what we meant to communicate is not what was received. So how can we avoid this from happening? Because if we're in a yoga class and a person misspeaks, big deal. We can just flip over on our bellies and get into child's pose. But if there's miscommunication that ends up in a patient chart, which we all know happens all the time, that could be extremely serious and potentially life-threatening. The answer, though, is quite simple. All we have to do is periodically during the interview, paraphrase what our patient has said. We can stop and say, just to make sure that I have this right, and then repeat to them what we think that we've heard. That will allow our patient to know that we're listening. It will let them correct any misconceptions that we may have picked up. Sometimes it jogs their memory, and they actually remember even more about their story. And we're sure that we have an accurate history. Now, why is this so important? It turns out that the history is the most important component in reaching our final diagnosis 75% of the time. Since we all spend so much time learning what to do for every particular diagnosis, a few extra seconds to make sure that we have the history right and therefore the diagnosis right seems like time very well spent. Wouldn't you agree? For those of you interested in learning more about communication, I highly recommend this text, Skills for Communicating with Patients. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe to my communication blog at helenefronickmd.wordpress.com. I'm Helene Fronick. Thanks for joining us for Doc Talk. We hope to see you again next time.